Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.
Hey everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. Welcome you to the 89th, count 'em, 89 Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition call. We are live on Zoom, and we are taped for my Progressive Radio Network show, which airs Thursdays at 5 p.m. on the prn.live. We have 57 people with us, and we are just thrilled to be back. Next week, on the 90th call, we are going to change our name. We are going to become the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition, or the Gree-Gree, in honor of the Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Our voodoo is with us, and it's not just voodoo economics, as George H.W. Bush pointed out back in the era of Reagan. We have serious magic with us, and we are going to expand our discussions officially to include discussions of the environment, and particularly green energy, and particularly the grotesque attack on rooftop solar. We want to point out that rooftop solar is essentially the equivalent in democratizing energy with paper ballots in terms of our electoral democracy. So today we have Ron Leonard, Tatanka, Wendy, Danette, and others who are going to, toward the second hour, going to go into the deep discussion here, the weeds, or weed, as we say, of renewable energy. So it's a big deal, and we're going to be expanding our horizon here. By the way, this is April of 2022, and these calls started in April of 2020. So this is our third year, going into our third year of doing these calls. We have some new people to welcome, but I want to run through the itinerary of our talk. We're going to start with BC and Bruce and AMARIS to discuss their massive change network, which is a really important new organizing effort. We're going to be joined hopefully by Andrea Miller, who's going to take us deep into her fantastic organizing from the Center for Common Ground. We're going to introduce her to Laura Danley and others who are organizing along a similar way. Then we're going to go really deep into the court battles now surrounding the vote, and upcoming vote in 2022, and especially the astounding chaos surrounding gerrymandering. I mean, the court decisions are just all over the map. And we also have our constitutional legal expert, Joel Siegel, my co-convener, with us to discuss, and Wendy Liederman in Florida, to discuss the Florida judge's decision, an astonishing decision, to reintroduce pre-clearance into the dynamic of election protection here. Pre-clearance was allegedly done away with in the horrible Shelby decision of 2013. But I'd love to meet this judge who has very, shall we say, craftily reintroduced the whole dynamic of pre-clearance, which could not be more important to the whole dynamic of election protection. We're also going to talk about the nukes in Ukraine. What has happened at Chernobyl is astounding. Many of you may know that the Russians have actually abandoned Chernobyl. It was the first major targets that they took over in their death march to Kiev, and you got to remember, Chernobyl happened in 1986, and the troops marching around Chernobyl got already immediately sick from radiation poisoning. I mean, it's astounding, and to the extent that the Russians have left the place. We're also joined here by, since we're talking on radio, the great Dennis Bernstein of KPFA in Berkeley. His show Flashpoints is now syndicated nationwide, and he's as great a talk host as I've ever been on with, and I've been on with a lot of them. So Dennis, great to have you with us. So the radio audience, welcome. Our audience now are up to 61 people. Glad to see everybody. And that's the essential rundown, the travel guide. Remember, none of the 4-letter words. You may not curse until we go off the recording in about 85 minutes, except in Yiddish. You are allowed to utter obscenities in Yiddish on the presumption that many of our listeners may not know what you're saying. So let's start off now. BISI Williams, you are in Evanston, Illinois. You, with Bruce Mao and AMARIS, are involved in a truly great organization called the Massive Change Network. We want to introduce you to and our listeners to that network. Can you tell what it's all about, please?
Well, Harvey and everyone, thank you for the invitation to the Gree-Gree. We're super excited to be here today. And yes, Massive Change Network stemmed, it's about 15 years old. And we looked at the world after having done a 20,000 square foot exhibition that traveled to 3 cities looking at the world of design. And from that world, we realized that if we're going to solve the great challenges of today, we're going to actually have to look and think about design differently. And out of that, we created the Massive Change Network. And when we look at design, it used to be that everything was a subset of, business, and then, economy, and then culture, et cetera. And we really flipped it around to look at that life-centered design is the center of everything that we do. So when we look at a designed world and everything that we touch is designed, that if things are poor or not working as they should, they can also be redesigned. And that's the beautiful thing that we've discovered and what we apply in our methodology. So we really start from life at the center, and a lot of the programs that your organization looks at, it's how do we make the world better using art, science, and technology to make the world more beautiful, more habitable, and to design new solutions. And so with that, the show and the exhibition about the world of design, we had 10 design economies, so everything from education to technology to materials to building to the environment, etc. Those are all design constructs. And the show is in Chicago, Vancouver, and Toronto. And looking at the world of design and what we're capable of doing, it was based on the premise of Arnold Toynbee, which is the 20th century won't be remembered for war and destruction, but it will be remembered as the era when we dared to think of the welfare of all of human life as the great objective. And Bruce was presenting, and a young person, this was 15 years ago, said, well, it's fine if you want to think about the welfare of human life as a great objective, but she said, just take out humans and put out all of life. And when we think about the welfare of all of life as an objective, that's the 21st century. And so when we look at that, we look at how we design everything, how we live, how we eat, how we sleep, how we grow, how we build communities together. And we look at it from the perspective of health. You can't have a healthy person in a toxic environment, and you can't have healthy people in or a toxic environment with healthy people. So they really are symbiotic in that sense. And with that, we're actually working on a massive action program, which is to demonstrate through the world of art, science, and technology, to show people that the world can and is getting better, and to showcase the new technologies and the new solutions and a new way of living, which is not unlike this program here, to ensure a better life, not only for today, but for future generations. And it sounds Pollyanna, but it's not. I think if you think about our energy, if you think about our health, if you think about our built environment, all of that is a design construct, as well as our systems for democracy. So what's functioning and what's not functioning, right? We look at these as design problems that are there to be solved.
Great. Do you want Amari? Can we unmute you and Bruce? Amari, do you want to add to what BC has just said?
Very, very excited to be here and to learn more and talk about how we can all work together.
Excellent. Bruce, do you want to tell us how we can get in touch with your organization and what you're going to be focusing on? Bruce Mao?
Yes, sure. Yeah, you can. Yeah, we're on social media, of course, on LinkedIn and also online at Massive Change Network. But I think BC really kind of summed it up. I started 40 years ago as a designer, and I started in the Gutenberg era, back when we were still using hot metal type. And back then, you really couldn't interrogate an image. If you saw an image, that's what you saw, and you had to be the New York Times, or you had to be an organization to really look through an image to try to see whether or not it was true. But when you put a billion, several billion of these devices together, and you network them, you make the world a transparent place, and that transparency means that we can actually see what is going on in a way that was never possible before. And what that meant was that everything is communicating, and that really is the new world. I mean, I think everyone on this call knows that we can see what's going on, and we can see what people are really up to. And that means that if what you're doing is not telling the story you want to tell, you have to redesign what you're doing. We like to say, just turn the sound off and watch the action. And if that action isn't the story you want to tell, then we have to redesign it and make it true to who you want to be. And that's really where we've what we do, and that means designing everything from organizations to institutions to social movements, and all those things can be designed. And if you think about how do we get the outcomes that we want, the moment that you have an outcome that you want, you're a designer. And then the question is, are you a good designer? Do you have good design tools? Do you have good design method to really get very precise in the outcome you want? And that's really what we help people to do. We've developed methods and processes and tools that we can help people do that. And we've designed social movements in Guatemala, and a 1,000-year plan for the future of Mecca, and kind of everything in between.
Well, if you can help us design a movement that will win a safe democracy and get us to 100% renewables, we're more than happy to have you on with us. BC, did you want to add something? And then Joel Siegel?
Sure. So one of the things that we use sort of 24 principles and a methodology to look at, give us a global view of a project or a problem, and almost to a person or a client, not only does everything communicate that you need to design it, but also really need to think about making the invisible visible, and that's the beauty of design. And so, we realize that change is really hard to see. It's rather infinitesimal, and that people think that nothing's happening or no one's doing anything, when in fact, when you actually can tell the story, build the environment, or share the picture, very quickly you come to see that there's more on the positive than there is on the negative. So that's the other part I'd like to add. Well,
we need your skills, so we're glad to have you on board as part of Gree-Gree here, and please keep coming back. I put your links and contacts in the chat, It's really great. Joel Siegel, did you?
Yeah, BC and Bruce Mao, welcome. Is that, are you related to the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya at all? No, it's a bad joke. I think what we're going to do is use wind power to generate clean coal, clean nuclear, and clean natural gas because they have no impact on global warming. Just kidding. So the question I want to ask is, I worked on a movie called Sicko with Michael Moore back when I worked with the Congress because I felt like the Congress did not understand what it was like to be uninsured. I grew up uninsured. So I figured if we used art to explain the misery of being uninsured and then going to Europe to explain what it might look like, you know, to have a universe. Or I wish we'd gone to Canada, but that was not my choice. Similarly, Sluggo is writing a book to update his book called Solartopia. And we brought in Professor Mark Jacobson. Do you know who Mark Jacobson is?
No.
Okay. Please, if you get a chance, just look up Mark Jacobson, The Solutions Project. And what he did is he's written a plan for every state in America and every country in the world, which it's wind and solar plan. What I did is I took his work and I turned it into a federal bill to get us to 100% clean renewable energy. The question I have is, we have these kind of giants corporations called utility companies. Now, where I live, it's Duke Energy. So in negotiations with them, we just passed a plan in Charlotte, North Carolina for us to go to 100% clean renewable energy in housing. Government buildings and housing. It was a real dogfight, but we won. But at the end of the day, is it not the case the utility companies are going to have a lot to do with wind? And would it make sense, as much as I don't want to say this and people may throw rotten eggs into my screen, I'm just talking about real politics. Wouldn't there have to be some kind of federal incentives for these cartels to go from, you know, dirty energy to wind? And because we're not going to break up that monopoly anytime soon, because we on the left in the progressive movement, we don't have the lawyers to do that. But when I talked to them about federal subsidies to go to wind and solar, they said they would listen to that. But I was just curious, how does your work fit into their monopolies?
So do you want to go, Bruce, or should
go ahead.
So we've actually, part of it is look at the communication, the side from the activists on the one side, what is it that they need and they want. And on the other, we look at the energy companies, what they need and they want. And essentially, there's a piece of friction in the middle. And we realize, okay, well, let's figure out what everybody needs. We did some research. And we recognize, okay, what's existential for the oil and gas majors, the proven reserves. And once you understand that the proven reserves are a problem for them, it's like, okay, well, what could we do? So our job as designers is like, well, what could we do to replace that revenue net new? What are the design solutions that we could look at? So we actually our team came up with a number of design solutions, which actually doesn't apportion shame and blame, but actually has a way forward. And one of the things that we came to, which I think you would love to hear, well, you don't need teams of lawyers, you do need some creativity, and they actually need us to rewrite the policy that they had actually purchased or had organized decades ago to actually achieve the whole thing with oil and gas. They're ready to actually unleash that. There's a huge, they said, it's the largest purchase order in America in history to actually undo what was done. And so I think we actually need grassroots and activist folks to actually petition at the municipal level and at the state level, and then eventually up to the federal level to actually undo that and redo it, to recreate the infrastructure that will actually make our world better, safer, and you can get to 80%. We just learned this morning using renewable energy for every household in America without having to change too much, right? Just the policy.
Fantastic. So we're going to work with you on Solartopia.
Right. That's what we need to do.
and we want to move ahead with that. So we're glad to have you on board. Thank you so much. Steve has a call, and then Andrea's not joined us. We're going to move ahead and get into the deep insanity of what's going on with gerrymandering and the ballot over and this latest court decision in Florida, which is astounding and very good. Steve Caruso, did you want to jump in?
Yes, they last year produced 100 gigawatts of solar, or not solar, wind, offshore wind last year. And one nuclear plant is 1 gigawatt. And this is 100 in 1 year. So, I mean, anybody that's thought about nuclear is just doesn't have a foot to stand on.
I got to say that I had there's a letter in today's Nation magazine from a guy I've known for 40 years who is advocating keeping nuclear plants open. And I just dashed off a letter to the Nation. I was writing for the Nation in 1976 when the Clamshell Alliance started happening, and to fight nuclear power. And I wrote him an angry note. And oh, there it is. There's my letter, just published in the Nation there. Sorry, Charlie, your piece is inaccurate, irresponsible, and insane. The letter I wrote to him personally was a little less polite, but nonetheless, you can look at this in the, this is coming from people who are advocating keeping nuclear plants open. These people are not going to be paying when Diablo Canyon blows up and covers Los Angeles in radiation. So this is the fight we're facing. And we'll get back to this in a bit. I do want to jump in on the legalities. And thank you, BC and Bruce and Amari. We're thrilled to have your organization with us, and we will certainly welcome you to all future Gree-Gree calls. So glad to have you aboard. Andrea Miller has not yet joined us, which is fine. We're going to move ahead. When she does, we'll give her the baton. But we want to talk now about the legalities of what's happening with gerrymandering. And I have to say, and I want to talk to Ohio and especially to Florida, that the gerrymandering situation in the United States today is complete chaos. You've got a situation now in Ohio, and we want to honor the name of Maureen O'Connor. Maureen O'Connor is the Republican Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. We've talked about this before. The Ohio Supreme Court is 4-3 Republican. The people of Ohio, and remember, we're talking about Ohio here. This is the ultimate swing state. The people of Ohio have voted twice to change the system by which districts are drawn for the state legislature and the congressional delegation. Ohio is a 54-46 right now, Republican versus Democrat, but the congressional delegation and the two houses of the state legislature are 75% Republican. And so the people of Ohio, by more than 70%, have twice voted to change how districts are drawn. And we went in, people went in hopefully to this year's districting process. It's done every 10 years, congruent with the census, which, as we all know, the Trump administration played games with this year, sabotaging a lot of the census and eliminated people of color. But nonetheless, we went into a districting process in Ohio very hopeful that changes would be made. The Republicans sabotaged the situation and made it even worse. Where Ohio lost a congressional seat. So from 12-4, Republican to Democrat in a 56-44 or 54-46 state, they now look like they've got it down to 14 or 13-2. They made it worse in the face of the demand of the Ohio electorate to make it better. And so the Republicans sent redrawn districts, these totally warped redrawn districts, to the Ohio Supreme Court, expecting a rubber stamp from the 4-3 majority. And instead, Maureen O'Connor, who deserves a Congressional Medal of Freedom, and I like to say that if Jack Kennedy was rewriting Profiles in Courage, she'd get a chapter. She single-handedly has overturned 4, count them, 4 attempts by the Republicans to completely RF, as we say in polite company, the redistricting process in Ohio as a result of her rejection, repeated rejection. Well, it's gotten even wilder. She called for a censure vote on the Republicans who've been resisting. This is her own party who've been resisting the anti-gerrymandering laws, and it's the law. She called for a hearing to censure these guys, and the list of people to be censured includes the governor, Mike DeWine, because he's been a party to this. And it turns out, this is why I love history, his son is one of the Republicans on the Ohio Supreme Court. So his son has had to recuse himself from decisions on these contempt hearings. So where they once had a 4-3 Republican majority, now they're losing 2-4 because he's gone and she's holding the line. And as a result of this, Ohio does not have districts to go into the 2022 election. People running for Congress do not know what district they're running in. It's amazing. And technically, now Ohio apparently is pushing forward with primaries, even though, but they're not able to have primaries for the state house, for the state legislature and the congressional delegation. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's phenomenal. And it's not clear what's going to happen. It will probably go to the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court. Meanwhile, the Republicans, including the Republican Secretary of State, are calling for Maureen O'Connor to be impeached. I mean, you can't, this is unbelievable stuff. Steve Caruso, you're in Columbus. You want to give us an update?
Yeah, well, you just quoted what I was going to say. Yeah, they're just recently over the weekend, the Secretary of State came out and said, yeah, that's fine. If you want to impeach the judge, that's up to you. These people are on board with the fascist Trumpers, and he's kind of gone. He's got 2 guys fighting against him that are Trump supporters, and so now I guess he thinks he needs to swing a little further to the right so he can get their votes too. But
right. Oh, you got all these Trump guys running for office, and of course they've targeted the secretaries of state. Steve Bannon's plan to take over the electoral process in America is very, very strongly focused on ousting secretaries of state. We know it's happening in Georgia, a massive camp. They have an extreme right-wing secretary of state, but he's not right-wing enough for the Trump Republicans. Now, this is going on all over the country. And in New York, for example, I don't know if we have any on Julie Weiner is often with us from New York, where there's a Democrat gerrymandering that's gone on. And the courts are rejecting the Democratic gerrymandering in New York. In Alabama, we had a gerrymandering that occurred very clearly, very explicitly to disenfranchise Black people. I mean, there's just no hiding this. And the Alabama Supreme Court threw it out and said, you can't do this as an obvious racist attack on the ability of Black people to be represented. But it went to the US Supreme Court, and the US Supreme Court overruled the Alabama Supreme Court and reinstated the racist gerrymandering. It's outrageous what they did. On the other hand, in North Carolina, and Joel, you might want to speak to this, and I want to say, I can't remember which one, the Supreme Court upheld state Supreme Court rejections of Republican gerrymandering. So it's actually gotten to be nonpartisan, but it's not coherent. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. And we are now, this is the United States of America in 2022. We're talking about major swing states here. We're now headed to a midterm election where you have major states that do not have settled congressional or state legislature districts. It's truly astounding. And Florida is one of the states where it's wildest. And Wendy and Joel, we have constitutional issues here. As I mentioned, a Florida judge has intervened now and reintroduced the concept of preclearance. Now, preclearance came with the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts of the 1960s. And they required that any change made by a state that had a history of racial discrimination to election procedures had to be pre-cleared with the federal Attorney General's office. Now, in the 2013 Shelby decision, Shelby versus Holder, which was written by John Roberts, the current Chief Justice, who had a history, as did Rehnquist before him, of election discrimination, of preventing people of color from voting. The Shelby decision gutted the protective provisions of the Voting Rights Act and said that preclearance was no longer necessary because the United States has transcended race. Mazel tov. We're all really glad to hear that. And immediately, immediately after that decision, states all over the country started, well, especially in the South, of course, started imposing discriminatory laws into the electoral process. Astonishingly blatant, shameless, racist disenfranchisement across the map. Now, this judge in Florida, I don't know who it is. Maybe Wendy or Joel, you can speak to who this person is, this judge.
Judge Walker, Mark Walker.
Okay. He very clearly intended to reintroduce this whole process of preclearance. Clearly, it's going to go to the US Supreme Court, and it will be very, very interesting to see what Judge Roberts says this time around. So Joel is a constitutional lawyer, and Wendy, as a Florida resident, it's all yours. Tell us what you know, please.
Sure. You did a great job, Sluggo, of explaining. I'll just go through the kind of the decision and what the ramifications of the decision are. So it's a federal judge in Florida, Judge Mark E. Walker, is a real hero. I think there should be a statue erected in his honor. So this is a federal district court in Tallahassee. So this is the first time that a federal court has struck down major elements of a wave of voting laws enacted by Republicans since the 2020 election. And what the judge found was there was a pattern of racial bias. Surprise, surprise, right? Florida, racial bias. But there were numerous voter restriction laws that were passed in Florida, limiting basic fundamental rights like early voting, et cetera. And make a very long story very short, what this very clever judge did is he took Section 3 of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement bled and marched and died for, and they put Florida under federal restrictions. So it's called bail-in for all you legal nerds out here. And a bail-in, it allows judges to impose additional federal oversight of election law if states or local governments are found to be repeat offenders in racial discrimination cases. So all this means now is that while the ruling is intact, the state legislature passes any kind of law that impacts, communities of color, there has to be what's called pre-clearance. The judge has to pre-clear that law. Right now, that law, the Florida law has been struck down sadly, the Republican judges on the circuit court most likely are probably going to say, you know what, we're going to overrule the federal court, and we'll probably go to the Supreme Court. Now, what was interesting in the ruling was how many times the judge used language from Martin Luther King speeches. So the pattern of discrimination in Florida against Black voters it's clear, a clear and present danger. What's scary to me is you can be a judge and have a little Klan suit on. Remember the little hats? And I've lobbied and worked in the North Carolina General Assembly since I was in law school. I don't see any difference between a Klan member and many of these judges and lawyers. Just because you wear a suit and tie and have the word judge, that doesn't mean anything. There are white nationalists all over the courts and all over the General Assemblies. They could care less about. Let me tell you what one Florida state legislature said about Blacks. They said they were lazy. That they didn't go vote. They were lazy. Have we ever heard that one before? Lazy. Now, this should make everyone completely furious. But the reason why this is important is because the bail-in provision can be used across the country. So this sets up, kind of a friction and legal tension between, progressive judges, and federal courts across the country and the Supreme Court. So this is a very, very significant, courageous decision. That's basically what we have. What all the judge did was he's implementing the 65 Civil Rights Act pre-clearance and not waiting for any bills in Congress to pass to restore it. It's an ingenious legal theories that what they're employing, but that's basically it. There's a chance for progress here. I'll posit in conclusion, without a grassroots movement similar to the 65 Civil Rights Movement pushing up against these terrible, voter suppression laws, we're not going to do too much. You cannot give due deference and respect to white nationalism, whether they're issued in a court of law or a state legislature. I think we're going to have to use civil disobedience, protest, boycotts, or we're not going to change this. You can't let the courts decide under their own volition about voting rights because we've already given them a chance and they failed us over and over again. There's a law, there's a theory of law called strict construction, where a judge is supposed to apply the law to the facts. That's not happening. They're applying the law to their political ideology, and that's to keep rich white guys in power. And they'll do anything they can to do that. So that's pretty much it.
Very good. Thank you, Judge. Wendy Liederman, can we unmute you? You're in Florida. Can you report on what's going on there?
Thank you. I'm sorry to say I've been moving and in transition all week and I haven't really been keeping up. And now what's actually disturbing kind of is like looking for more information. I saw that Mike put something in the chat and I can barely find any information on this, like local news, national, like I'm not like just looking now, like, and so I think that that's a huge part of it too, is see, from my experience in Florida, just in general with the legal system and going through, I'll say for the case of evictions, but basically it's a war on the poor where there's such a culture of corruption and extortion that's so fluent and casual in the Florida court system in general that is not written about by the press. So that might be something to just look at as that simple angle is that, it's like, I'm from Broward, so we're the most Democratic county here, but and South Florida and North Central Florida, like that it's like two different states. So that's to keep in mind too, from like the local point of view. But I mean, we're definitely known to have racism throughout seeping. I mean, we're the South, but a big part of it is that like right now, I'm like barely finding if I didn't see it, then if Mike could maybe post that article, because I haven't really heard anything about it. I'm learning about it mostly from you, and I'm embarrassed to say like this new thing. And I don't know if anybody mentioned. I just want to throw in today's April 4th, and it's Martin Luther King, and just ironic that we're here still honoring legacy and fighting for this. So that's basically my input, is that we just need to get the public informed, because this, and like the utility monopoly, like the sentiment and the support is there from the public. They just don't have anything to get behind, and they don't know that it's happening. So that's the best I can,
It's perfectly great. Thank you, Wendy. We're going to come back to you when we talk about solar in Florida. Simultaneously, of course, the Republicans in Florida trying to kill rooftop solar there. We're going to hear from Ron Leonard and others about that as we proceed. So this legal situation is really intriguing. The gerrymandering thing, I mean, it's April, and as you say, it is unfortunately the anniversary of the killing of Martin Luther King, and I just read a major article last night about linking J. Edgar Hoover. There's still quite a bit of evidence that J. Edgar Hoover ordered the killing of Martin Luther King, and someday maybe we'll find out exactly who did it. I will guarantee you three things in honor of this anniversary. James Earl Ray did not kill Martin Luther King. Lee Oswald did not kill Jack Kennedy, and Sirhan Sirhan did not kill Bobby Kennedy. So three small details there, but the legalities now of this situation are immensely impactful. This is the kind of thing these calls were designed to deal with. We have this decision from this judge. This is a federal judge, and this decision will go to the Supreme Court. They will, I predict, and Joel, I'll get you in a minute, you can confirm or deny what I'm going to say here. I will guarantee you that the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, will delay a ruling on this until after the midterm election. The last thing that John Roberts wants to talk about at this point in time is preclearance, which he single-handedly killed in 2015. And at the same time, the utter chaos in the districting process is purely third world. I mean, this is not something you would expect of an advanced country after 220 years of constitutional law. I mean, come on. This is 240, actually. I mean, this is unheard of. As a historian, on a federal level, I cannot find a single equivalent precedent. To go in at this point in time to midterm elections without settled congressional districts is insane. And here we are. Joel, Attorney Siegel, did you want to?
Yeah, Wendy is right, though, about lack of information. It's not going to be in the Florida papers. My mother lives in Florida, so she's right on time about that. Gee, I wonder why. But just, I want to read two salient features of it. Now, this is the New York Times article, Judge Rules Parts of Florida Voting Law Unconstitutional. And that was March the 31st, 2022. For the past 20 years, the majority in the Florida legislature has attacked the voting rights of its Black constituents. Walker wrote in the decision, which frequently quoted Reverend Dr. King. Walker argued that the attacks were part of, quote, a cynical effort to suppress turnout among their opponents' supporters. That the law does not permit. Now, this is really important. The ruling targets the portions of the law that limited the use of drop boxes. That means in Black neighborhoods. In other words, the Republican majority reduced the number of drop-off boxes in Black neighborhoods. I don't think that's a hard stretch to say violation of the 65 civil rights. Place strict rules on voter registration organizations and forbade some kinds of assistance to Floridians waiting in line to vote. So what they did in Florida is they replicated the Georgia law, the pizza law, which said that you can't have organizations or people feeding those who, I don't know, waiting for 3 to 4 hours, this, communist subversive drink called water. And now for a judge to say that that's not discrimination, I would say we're going to have to get to the point where we start calling out these judges and asking them to recuse themselves and to resign from the bench. We're going to have to be way more activist than we ever have before. And we're going to have to embarrass them and shame them because they try to be legitimate by saying, oh, the judge in Florida was a Democrat and he was activist. No, he's trying to enforce law. But we got to start calling these judges out because we don't know who they are. We have to cut off whatever campaign contributions to them. But more importantly, we got to boycott the states where they're located in and not allow them to operate without, with impunity. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Very good. Tatanka and then Steve in Ohio. Tatanka.
Yeah, we're at the stage now where we can't be shocked. This is a Steve Bannon. We need to have part of a program on Steve Bannon because he really sets out to make the government ungovernable. So it is in a chaotic position to be taken over. And, it's no surprise and it's no shock to any of us that we keep quoting Donald Trump said, if we let all Democrats vote, no Republican would win another election. So they're really focusing on a paper ballot without the ballot images. They will control the vote count, which is what Steve Bannon wants in these Republican states. And the goal is to return to a minority oligarchy, a white nationalist oligarchy. Very clear about it. And we had Nancy McLean on, a couple of weeks ago to talk about her book, Democracy in Chains. It's all there, their form of libertarianism, which, praises liberty and private property at the expense of equality. So we need a strategy. We basically need a national, massive, as Joel talked about early, nonviolent response, a disciplined nonviolent response to this as it comes up. So we'll just say that we need to begin to have that discussion and have people on it who have history with that and what works and what doesn't work.
BC and Bruce, you guys can help us design that strategy. Steve Caruso, then Lynn Feinerman.
Yes, LaRose, the Secretary of State here in Ohio, was saying that the election is now ongoing. So Joel, what's the story? What's the phrase that they use when you can't put any rulings in place during an ongoing or close to an election?
Oh, I couldn't hear the last part, Brother Steve.
He's wondering, the Supreme Court has shied away from getting involved in certain electoral nightmares by saying it's too close to election time. And then they turn around and in another case, go ahead and make a decision. They've been completely inconsistent. I think that the proper term, a legal term to describe those decisions is complete BS. That comes from Oliver Wendell Holmes, utter nonsense. So, I don't know any way other to describe it unless you do, Joel. And then we'll defer to Lynn Feinerman and then Wendy.
Now, just briefly, the Supreme Court majority has been compromised by aligning themselves with the right-wing Congress and operatives. It's real clear to me they should have never gutted pre-clearance. Shelby versus Holder was a right-wing political decision. I don't care what anyone says. I've been in this business. I'm from the South. I know a little bit about the right wing. Hillary Clinton was not wrong when she said there's a vast right-wing conspiracy. Everybody laughed at her. I'm not laughing at her. She's right. But we got to learn to call it out. And I think Tatanka's correct. We need some kind of a national strategy. But to say that, you're not going to deal with a Supreme Court case because it's too close to an election. There's elections all the time. So just don't have any Supreme Court decisions at all. I mean, it's a nuanced, bogus argument. It doesn't fly. It's nonsense.
Lynn Feinerman and then Wendy and then Eric. Lynn Feinerman.
Yeah, what I'm asking here, and I totally agree with everything Joel just said, but all of these things seem to happen on short term and on short-term notice. What I want to know is how are we going to stop their money? How are we going to end the money flow? And the money flow is coming from one great big fat spigot. It's called Charles Koch and Koch Industries. And so how do we target that beast?
Press conferences and marches.
Yes, and the flip
That
side
expose
is,
them.
the flip side is, and when Andrea comes on maybe next week, is how do we get the Democrats to spend the money that they have on grassroots organizing instead of throwing it down the toilet on these ridiculous TV ads. The Democrats actually, as best I can tell, I may be wrong, but I have seen indications that the Democrats actually have more money than the Republicans going into the midterms. But if we look at what they did with it in Virginia, they just threw it down the toilet. We won in Georgia because some of the money, at least, went to grassroots organizing. But the Democrats, when they get money, they just waste it. Steve Bannon is crafty enough to know that if he pays, grassroots organizers to walk around with their guns, that he's going to win. The Democrats, even without the guns, don't just seem to have any kind of sense of that. And thank you, Lynn, for that. Wendy, and then Eric, and then Tatanka. Wendy, you there?
Oh, she's on mute.
You're still on mute. Hold on. Wendy, you're muted. There you go. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Actually, this is just perfect segue, because you guys are literally. I just want to share some quick anecdotal experience from on the ground in Florida, just basically proving the point that you can't trust the Democratic Party. I shared this with the group when I first came on last year, but just for people who haven't heard, we have DeSantis and Rick Scott for a senator because of the Democratic Party. I can say that through the experience I had when I volunteered to oversee the recount during the election. And basically, just to make a long story short, the Democrats I had to volunteer through the DNC, and they made it impossible by changing the hours that volunteers could come in to just to watch the recount. And then before the recount even happened, when they were calling provisional ballots and absentee ballots because they needed to check to verify something, they weren't keeping track of who had already been called. So people were getting called so many times, to just verify their vote, that they were literally like threatening me to call the police because they were being harassed by just basically being called so many times because there was no organization within the DNC. But they made it so that what was supposed to be 4 or 6 hour shifts for 24 hours a day turned into 12-hour shifts for 12 hours and not 24 hours. And it made it so that nobody could possibly volunteer. And I've seen it so that I've gone to check my polling place and it's changed last minute, and it's gone somewhere that there's no public transportation there. But we can't rely on the DNC to be on our side with this. It has to be grassroots. It has to be independent and progressive. And right now, the progressive name and independence is the only thing that can really has any merit to it, because both sides perpetuate the status quo. And thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Sorry for the noise and the bad signal.
Thank you, Wendy. Eric Lazarus, and then we'll jump to Dennis, and then Tatanka. Eric?
Hey, quick point. I just put it into the chat. Good news is motivational, at least according to The Daily, which is the New York Times main podcast. There really is some wonderful electoral map news that people might not be aware of. So it's a very heartening broadcast and a good reason to work harder for these actual elections. Thanks so much. It's basically saying that a number of court decisions and a number of things kind of came in the Democrats' favor. So getting Democrats elected should be somewhat easier than it would otherwise be. Thank you.
Let's hope. Let's hope for that. Dennis, and then Tatanka, and then Justin. Dennis Bernstein, host of Flashpoints. Dennis, you got to unmute, bro.
There
you
I'm
go.
unmuted. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So I just wanted to, this might seem a little far afield, but I really wanted to throw this into this discussion. As we talk about this, and we're flabbergasted at what local and national governments and what the Supreme Court and the Senate, even the Democrats, will and will not do. And while people are horrified at what we already know was Trump's plan, at this very moment, even as the United States goes deeper into the Ukraine war, they are busy trying to overthrow the government, to undermine, destabilize the government of Pakistan, the duly constituted government of Pakistan, because Joe Biden and the US feels that they're too friendly with India and with China and with Russia. So once again, the United States ignoring, as it did, undermining the Russian government and the elections that brought us Yeltsin and then Putin. They're now, even though they're declaring this demon in Russia, they're trying to destabilize, Harvey, a nuclear power. So I just want to put that into the mix when we worry about digging nuclear trenches around Chernobyl, all these horrific things. The United States continues a policy that contributes to the dangers we now face. So we lose our ability to elect people in this country while the United States destabilizes other governments. I just want to put that in when we're thinking about election and election fairness and what it means.
Absolutely. I mean, Putin is in power in Russia because the CIA put him there. And I'm glad to hear that India and Pakistan are on good terms with each other. We almost had a war, a nuclear war. Did I understand that correctly? Dennis, go ahead. Sorry. Got to unmute you. Hold on. Yeah, go ahead, Dennis. He's muted. Can we unmute Dennis? We'll come back to you, Dennis.
Okay, can you get me now? You got me now?
Yes.
So I didn't say that India and Pakistan were good friends. I'm saying there's a government in Pakistan now that's, if you will, just to put it in gross terms, open to do business with China and Russia and whoever in the world they choose to. The United States does not like that, particularly now. So they're willing, in the midst of a very fragile moment in history, they're willing to go for another destabilization. Talking about elections, I'm just putting that into context when we think about what's happening and what's happening to the power of the people to vote.
Okay.
They want.
Thank you for that. This is the Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call. This is our 89th. Next week will be the Gree-Gree, Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. Thank you, Dennis Bernstein, host of Flashpoints at KPFA, nationally syndicated. And we're going to continue with this. This is the core of what we do here. And then we will get into the fight over rooftop solar after this. Tatanka, Justin, and Mary. Tatanka, back to you, and then Justin LeBlanc and Mary Butler Stonewall.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, for bringing that context in. We may be at the stage where it's maybe what a major power, our country, that really wants hegemonic control, full spectrum dominance, is the military policy that came out, in 91 after the fall of the Soviet Union. Instead of making peace, just like, the decision at the end of World War II to make them an enemy rather than an ally, we have come to the place now where we have the effect of, in our climate change, an entire political party, the Republican Party, bought by big oil, and through the efforts of the Koch brothers. And I appreciate the person bringing that up. I know in California, with our strategy over 3 years of eliminating 3 years of bills, our first one is this Senate Bill 1230 on electrification of light vehicles and of cars and light trucks, because 40% of the emissions of California are from transportation. We aim to have, within 3 years' time, 7 different sectors, including agriculture and water, et cetera, to California to zero carbon by 2030. So in addition to the top-down strategy of a bill, the bottom-up building a coalition, Danny Sheehan has written up and has not yet introduced to Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, but is using, because the United States has prided itself as being a nation of law, and the civil rights movement was to implement a law that of equality in voting. And so the use of the RICO Act, which Danny and Sarah used.
Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.